Thanks, Aileen. That was some pretty awesome fast talking. I haven't heard talking that fast since my daughter stayed out late past her curfew. We are joined now by Rushi Patel, who is Associate General Counsel for Georgia Municipal Association and our leading expert on House Bill 60, which to many people is known as the gun bill. Big changes coming, Rushi, with that on July 1st, correct?
Correct. So the law is not effective yet, but it will be effective in about 2 weeks now, July 1st, 2014. And there are some major changes to the Georgia law in relation to city government as to what we can and can't do in cities.
What are some of the biggest changes?
The biggest change that I've seen for city governments is how government buildings are treated. So previously, government buildings did not have weapons allowed in them, any weapons. So guns, knives, which included handguns or long guns like shotguns. So the change in the law now, starting July 1st, is going to be weapons, which are handguns and knives, will be allowed in government buildings unless the government building is secured by security personnel.
So a government, for example, that doesn't want people coming into, say, a recreational center, in order to prevent weapons from coming in, they have to have some kind of security.
Correct. So in order to prevent weapons from coming into that recreation facility, the city would have to post security personnel at the entrances, the public entrances, and check for, or screen or restrict as people come in.
But they can also have the option of they just let anybody in. So
correct. So if the city decides that they can't afford to pay for security personnel, or if they just want to allow weapons into those buildings, they can just say, we're not going to post security personnel and weapons are allowed in.
Rushi, I've heard a lot of people that I deal with have a lot of questions about this, and it seems like there's a great deal of confusion as well as to what you can do, you can't do. And I think you've recorded some presentations we have available on the website that people can listen to.
We have, and we've also sent that out to mayors, council members, city attorneys, police chiefs, managers, and clerks. And the recorded information comes in a 3-part webinar. And we've split it up into basically what existing laws are currently as the first part. The second part talks about government buildings. And then the third part talks about courthouses, commercial service airports, polling places, schools, and some kind of a catch-all part.
Okay. Because I think one of the big questions has been about, our city hall has a court, we hold court in our city hall.
Right.
Can we restrict guns from coming in?
And so that's actually a really complicated question in the new state law. And so the law has a definition.
What, you mean the state law isn't just simply yes or no?
Right. It's amazing, isn't it? So new state law actually relies on old definitions. And the old definitions have a definition for courthouse and a different definition for government building. The definition for courthouse is actually really straightforward and simple. It's basically any building in which judicial proceedings or judicial rooms are held. Okay.
And that can be a city hall in that case.
And it could be a city hall in that case if the municipal court happens to be held in city hall.
And in many cases it is.
And in many cases it is. So what ends up happening is you might have a municipal court in a building that also has other city departments in that building. Government building, however, is defined in a more narrow fashion. And the government building is defined as a building where the public entity is housed. But then it goes on to say, like, if a city is renting a private building or renting part of a private building, it's only that part of the building. Or if they're in a private building and they only have a meeting in that private building from 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock.
Can you give us kind of an example of what kind of facility that would be that's a private building that they're renting?
Sure. Many of our newer cities actually rent out
That's a good one.
floors in office complex. So they might have the 5th floor of ABC Towers. And so the way the law reads is the government building isn't the entire ABC Towers.
It's just
it's
those
the 5th
floors.
floor.
Okay.
Or some of our new cities might actually have a meeting in a private building only from 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock. And so the way that the law reads is that's only a government building from 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock.
Okay.
So government building is actually defined narrowly, whereas courthouse is defined broadly as the entire building. And the important note I keep making to folks is a courthouse is always going to be a government building, whether or not it shares space or not.
Right.
Because the courthouse does actually house a body of the government.
Right.
Municipal court in our case. So while a courthouse is always a government building's not necessarily always a courthouse.
Right.
So
right.
there's a distinction.
So make sure I understand this. A lot of cities hold municipal court maybe only one day a week.
Correct.
But as long as you're holding the court that one day a week in City Hall, you're always a courthouse?
Well, and what I've been suggesting to folks is that they need to talk to their city attorney about how to approach this. And if you're going to say that that building is a courthouse, you better have court in that building, first of all. And if you're going to have calling it a courthouse, if you're going to call it a courthouse, you should probably have court at a consistent manner, like every week or every other week, whatever your court cycle is. You shouldn't say, oh, we had court in that building once this year, so that's a courthouse.
Right.
You're probably going to run into trouble if you do that. But cities should talk to their city attorney about the definition of courthouse, the definition of government building, and how weapons are treated at each building.
What if you just accept police fines in your city hall? Like you're the intake point for people paying their fines. Does that qualify you as a courthouse?
If the city is just accepting the police fines, I don't think that that's going to fall into that definition of courthouse, because it's talking about judicial proceedings being held and judicial rooms in that building. And I don't think those are judicial rooms or judicial proceedings. I think that might be just considered an intake.
Are there other areas of the law that you've been getting questions on that you maybe frequently asked questions?
Yeah, the most common question actually has been, can we just post signs to prohibit weapons in this building? And the answer to that is just simply no. You cannot just post.
It has to be some more formalized form of security.
Right, there has to be actual security personnel if you're going to prohibit weapons in that government building. So you can't just slap a sign up and say no guns allowed and then do nothing else.
Right.
You actually have to post guys there.
And security, does that necessarily mean it has to be a police officer standing there?
Right, and that's the second most common
Okay.
question is, what does it mean by security personnel? And the law actually says security personnel. It doesn't say post-certified
Okay.
police officer. What it does say, however, is if a license holder wants to, or if a license holder attempts to bring a weapon into a government building that's been restricted, the only time he can be charged, or she can be charged with a misdemeanor, is if at least one member of that security personnel is a certified peace officer. So that's an important distinction.
Okay.
Another distinction that people need to know that I'm not sure if I've made yet is, if you don't have security at your government building, only license holders are technically allowed into that building. People
Right.
that do not have a Georgia weapons carry license cannot bring it into that building.
Right. But you can't ask them, if somebody walks in with a gun, or you can't say, oh, do you have a permit for that?
Well,
They
you can ask them.
Okay.
They don't actually have to answer you.
Okay.
And
But
you
you
certainly
can't stop
can't
them.
detain them. You can't stop them.
Okay.
So,
When you said they had to have security, that means maybe just a security officer, or do you have to have some kind of screening like many of us are familiar with in some buildings we go in?
that is a great question. And the law only says you have to have security personnel. It does not say you have to buy metal detectors. It doesn't say you have to pat everybody down. It just says ingress is restricted or screened by security personnel. And as to what that means, that's a good question.
So maybe I could be a security personnel.
You look like one.
We'll get you a cape and a sword and the trash can lid, and you're ready to go.
Like Econo Man over here.
We really like that one. That's great. Rishi, what do you anticipate after July 1st? What do you think is going to happen with a lot of our cities? Have you heard from them as to kind of maybe what most cities are doing or anything like that?
Well, I can't speak to what most cities are doing. I can tell that a lot of cities have inquired as to what they are going to need to do, and a lot of cities have used the resources available to them, which is good. And hopefully that means come July 1st, we're not going to see cities getting into trouble with
Right.
accidental violations of this new law.
Right.
Now, do I believe that that's actually going to happen? I'll wait to see, because
Right.
we have a lot of cities and a lot of different situations arise, and honestly, this is the kind of law that people like to test.
And do you anticipate that there may be parts of this law that actually courts are going to be making rulings on at some point in the future, making decisions about, like, well, this is what this really means, or that type of thing?
I would honestly be very surprised if courts didn't have to make some decisions as to certain parts of this law,
Right.
because there are certain parts of this law, for instance, that courthouse government building thing that might end up getting litigated,
Right.
which is why, again, it's important, if you have that question, talk to your city attorney.
Right. Always talk to your city attorney
Right.
before.
And importantly, I am not your city attorney.
That's right.
But the city attorney can call you to
Correct.
get more clarification on the law, so you can have attorney to attorney speaking about issues.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I'll be glad to talk to your city attorneys.
And to be clear, I know GMA throughout the process of the legislation, we were opposed to this legislation, but what was our main concern as far as the
Our main concern with this legislation was local control, and it's that simple. Is we wanted to have the ability, and it's actually been a GMA policy for a long time,
right?
to have the city council in each city be able to decide for themselves whether or not weapons can be allowed into what buildings. So we wanted local control. It had nothing to do with being pro-gun or anti-gun. It was simply, we want local control, and we
Right.
fight for local control on a
On a
wide
lot of
array
Yeah.
of issues.
Yeah. Well, Rushi, thank you so much, and we'll again guide people to the website to see the webinars that you have done, and I think there's some printed material up there as well that they can look at. But always, 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 before making any big decisions like this, talk to your city attorney. That's money well spent if they can keep you out of trouble. So thank you again, Rushi. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Aileen, back to you.